topic in Islamic history. This important person, no other than Khalid ibn Walid, also known as the sword of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think and I hope that by this time, in this part of the class, we can clearly understand why he was given that title. We talked about this encounter that he had with the Persian, a well-known Persian general. We talked about this, the status of their hats, and if there was like 100,000 dirhams, that this person was the cream of the crop of the Persian Empire. You couldn't go any higher than that. They were like beneath the emperor. And so Khalid ended up having this duel with this person. The individual tried some coward stuff by grabbing him and holding him so some other people could come and kill him. And then also our hero, Al-Qaqa bin Amr, came and he cut all three of their heads off, and then Muslims became victorious. And as they go, they were having these other encounters. And we have to remember that this within itself is a revolutionary thing. The Persian Empire had been in existence for over 12 centuries, and they had conquered great amount of land. They were probably the longest running empire in history. And they had, even though that they had a lot of internal issues, but they had a magnificent army. They would fight in a style where the men would be chained together. And this was done in order to make the front line very strong and hard to break through. And it also had disadvantages as well, where the Persian Empire outnumbered the Muslims. And usually this is always the case in Islam, where the Muslims were always outnumbered. In this particular situation, the Persian soldiers had all of this stuff on. They had armor on their arms and armors on their legs. They had they might have an axe in their hand. They might have a mace in the other hand. They had a bow and arrow on the back, or slung around the shoulder on their back. And so were they out in terms of weaponry? The Muslims had the advantage of being able to move quick and fast. All right. And so alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are blessing the Muslims with all kinds of victories. And according to Tabari, as of right now, we're up to about 30,000 Persian soldiers that the Muslims have killed thus far. And we haven't even got into some of the other battles yet. So I think we dealt with Kazima, and there were some other battles that they got. And now the Muslims are dealing with Tigris and Euphrates. So now they're coming more out of the desert, and they're coming more into unfamiliar territory, and they're dealing with situations where there's rivers and waters and all of these kind of things. And so we'll jump right into it. So Khalid had to make sure that administrative matters were being dealt with, because there was a situation that we had before where the Muslims had conquered a particular area, and when they left and they were not as much as they used to be, then the people had rebelled, and then things had kind of gotten out of their hand again. So what he would do, he stayed a little bit longer to kind of ensure that there would be order, that the people were abiding by the treaties, and that Islam would be a force to be seen and to be abided by in those areas. Okay, so across the Euphrates, a trail of the vanquished army of Khalid was starting to form. So other agents were moving along the Euphrates towards Hira to discover further movements and concentration of the imperial army of Khosrow. All right, and so this was an issue that they had to deal with. And it's the same thing in the War of the Apostates, when the Muslims would defeat one army, and then the people who were able to escape, they would go and join the next group of people that had an issue with the Muslims. Okay, so the news of all of these fightings, and it was, remember, it's called, I want to say, the river. It had inflamed the capital, which is Ctesiphon. Okay, so Hira is the objective. All of these fights that the Muslims are going to the objective is to get to Hira. Hira is the big fish, okay? And Ctesiphon is another big fish as well. So the second Persian army had to be cut into pieces, and this was unexpected. As a matter of fact, there's some guys out of the desert who they had all of this disrespect towards, was killing all of these people of high status and defeating these large armies of the Persian Empire because they lost some key areas that the Muslims now had control of, that were like ports to different places and so on and so forth, that the Muslims now had control of this. So the emperor, his name is Ardashir, and he didn't want to take any chances. So he ordered that a concentration of another two armies be put together, okay? So they had about 300 miles. Wherever the Persians was getting ready to encounter the Muslims, it was about 300 miles from Ctesiphon by road, okay? So the strategy that the Persians used is that they would have probably hundreds of men. So it would act kind of like as a line, so to speak. And they would also, the one battlefield area would be battlefield A, and then it would be battlefield B, battlefield C, battlefield D, and it would be like a line of them saying, and this would get what was going on with the army, would get back to the emperor in a couple hours. So this is the way that they used to keep the emperor informed as to what was going on, and any other encounter that they may have also had. I could see this also being effective if they had any other encounters with any other armies that they had to do. They were able to transmit information quick. All right. So the following orders of the emperor, the Persian warriors began to concentrate at the capital. So they came from all of the towns and garrisons manning the western frontier and the eastern, except for the Eastern Roman Empire. So they stayed in that part of the western because now they got the Muslims to worry about, and they've been fighting the Byzantine Empire, which is formerly Rome. They've been doing this for years, okay, and maybe even centuries. Allahu Alam. So they couldn't take the soldiers from there and everybody else. This was a situation now that the Muslims were being taken serious. Before it was like, we'll send a couple troops that way, we'll deal with them, and so on and so forth. We outnumber them. And so now that with all of these victories that the Muslims are having, now they're starting to get the attention of the Persian Empire, like big time. So they sending and calling out for all of these people in the surrounding towns, all of the garrisons to come and to help fight against Islam. So the Persians understood the Arab mind well enough to know that no Arab force would move away from the desert. So they were kind of banking on this. So they expect the Muslims to move west, and this particular ruler picked on Walaja as a place in which they would stop Khalid. So now the next battle they're getting ready to fight is a place called Walaja. So the first of the new Persian armies raised at Ctesiphon was placed under the command of a person by the name of Andar Zaghar. Now remember, I said my Persian is not good, so it's not Arabic. These are the Persian names. So he was responsible for the frontier at Husaran, and he was held in high esteem by the Persian Arabs. The Persians and the Arabs, I'm sorry. So he was born a Persian, but he was raised in an area where it's nothing but a bunch of Arabs in this particular place in Iraq. So he had grown up around the Arabs, and he was somebody of high class, and he actually was a little bit different from some of these other people because he actually held some fondness for the Arabs. Okay, so remember, they used to look down upon them, and the Arabs, even when the Battle of Tabuk, those particular areas that they had encountered, some of them had these relationships with the Persian empires, and some of them had relationship with the Byzantine empires as well. All right, so when he arrived at Walaja, this particular person, he was happy at the strength of his army. So he had a bunch of people in his army, And he waited for a person by the name of Bahman, who was to join him a few days later on. So the army is about to be massive. So Bahman was the commander of the Second Army, and he was one of the top personalities of the Persian Empire. He was another 100,000 dirham individual. So he was ordered by the emperor himself to take his second army and go to Walajah in order to help this other person, Anda Zaha, and he would wait for him. So and Bahman was going to be the one who was going to be the overall commander of this particular army. Okay, so the Battle of the River had been a glorious victory for the Muslims, but the battle left Khalid in a more thoughtful mood. And only now did he really appreciate the immense resources that the Persian Empire had, because they pretty much was just like kind of touching the tip. Now, they didn't kill 30,000 people at least, and going through all of these fights, that they just touching the tip of the Persian Empire. Okay, so he had fought 2 of the bloody wars or bloody battles, and he had driven them off the battlefield, and they was only on the fringes of the empire. So he was the first Muslim commander to ever come out and conquer this much area away from the this particular area. Okay, so there was no superior to whom he could turn to for guidance in matters of politics and administrations. Moreover, his men were not as fresh as he was on the eve of Kazima. The Muslims is exhausted. I don't know if everybody ever got into a fight anymore. I mean, or a fight before, but you got a good 90 seconds. They said the fist fight lasts about 90 seconds. So they fighting people left and right. So they exhausted from being in this fight. So Khalid had organized an efficient network of intelligence agents. So the agents were local Arabs who were completely won over by the generosity of the Muslims. And once again, brothers and sisters, we talked about this is the best form of dawah, the way in which we behave, our character. This is the best. So they have been getting treated like garbage from the Persians. The Muslims come, this is their own people, by the way, now, and they come with generosity and good etiquette. And so the Arabs were looking like, man, it would be better for them to be in charge anyway. So they had started cooperating with the Muslims and gave very good intel. All right. So Khalid had realized that the 2 armies would shortly meet up with each other. So what he needed to do is, he was in this route of Walajah. So his thing is, okay, I have a better chance of being more successful by cutting off one of the armies before they able to merge with each other. All right. So one of the issues that we had talked about before is the Battle of Khazima, the one that was fought by the river, the Battle of Qarin. All of these people that had escaped, the Muslims weren't able to catch up with them. And so it was large numbers of them escaping and going and then joining the other armies. So if it was Arab Christians, if it was Persians, they were kind of able to refortify themselves and be fresh for this new army that's coming to fight the Muslims. So if he had a chance of defeating them, he would have to make sure that none of them got away this time in order to join the next battle for whenever they fought the other people. So Khalid had given instructions to a person named Suwaid and to see the administration of the conquered district with a team of officials, and posted new detachments to guard the lower Tigris against the possible enemy crossings and the northeast, and to give warning of any fresh enemy forces coming from those particular directions. So with the rest of the army, about 15,000 soldiers that Khalid had with him, he sets out in the direction of Hira, which Walajah is on this path going towards Hira. Okay, so the individual and the Zahar, he had been given the choice, and he would have preferred to wait for the other guy, Bahman, to come, but the Muslims is on your doorstep now. So he looked at the situation and was like, well, even though Bahman is not here, we can still get with the Muslims because we outnumber them greatly. So he still had a whole bunch more warriors than the Muslims had. So the following morning, the armies were getting ready for battle. And, of course, with the right wing, the left wing, and the center, and the Muslim armies were again commanded by Asim bin Amr and Adi ibn Hatim. And we talked about Adi. He was the one that got his tribe to come back from apostasy and not join Tulayha. So the Persian Empire commander was surprised at the strength of the Muslim army. So he looked at it and was like, it's only 10,000 soldiers that I see. Now, remember, Khalid went out with 5,000, and inshallah, we're going to get back to that in a minute. So he heard from his scouts that he had a much larger army than what he was seeing. So he was wondering where the Muslim cavalry was. Everybody, for the most part, seemed like they were on foot. So he didn't know if the people from Kazima and from the river had exaggerated the Muslim army strength. They probably was mistaken. So he's definitely looking and say, that's not 15,000 soldiers. That looked like it's about 10. Okay. So the situation, he put him in good high spirits. Now they really outnumbered him. And he was figured that he was going to destroy this small force again and clear Iraq permanently of these Arab invaders. So he first awaited for the Muslims to attack him. So he held back, and his thing was to wear the Muslims down. And then he would launch a counterattack, and then he would crush the Muslims. And when Khalid's army advanced for a general attack, he was definitely overjoyed because that's exactly what he wanted. Okay. So for about an hour, a little bit over, the Muslims started getting tired. I mean, that's a long time to be fighting. So they fighting each other for an hour. They're going back and forth. And he saw that the Muslims were starting to get tired. And so the Muslim spirit, he felt, was starting to go down. And so during this first phase of the battle, the Muslims gained further confidence from the thrilling that Khalid ended up dueling with this particular Persian champion. And this guy was huge. And he was known, his name was Hazar Mard. And he had been described to being equal to 1,000 warriors. So we now know that this language that people would use back then would just emphasize that the person was of great whatever. Okay. And so they said that he was equal to 1,000 warriors. So the giant stepped forward and he challenged Khalid to a duel. All right. So when the Persians, when he came to him and they're dueling for a few minutes, Khalid found an opening. He fell on the dude and he stabbed him. He stabbed him up with his sword and he killed him. So as this guy's body was laying there and he's dead, Khalid then sits on his chest and has lunch. So he sits on his chest and he has lunch like he used him as a chair, and he's sitting there eating lunch in front of the enemy on this great warrior that he just got finished killing. So that first phase was over with. So the second phase of the battle, they began a counterattack of the Persians. So the commander could clearly see the fatigue of the Muslims again. And so he judged this was the right moment for a counter stroke. And this is when the Persians surged in order to come in to try to destroy the Muslims. So the Muslims were able to hold for some time, and they were called upon to make a place where their nerves was at an all-time high. Okay, so they slowly fell back in a good order, and then the Persians got even more bold. So what is Khalid doing? He's drawing them in, and he's drawing them in, and he's drawing them in. And so they get more bold. So if you get more bold, then you start making more mistakes. And so Khalid, it says that he was fighting like a lion, and he urged his men to continue to keep doing the same thing. One of the things that's different about Khalid, if you see like some of the or hear about people like Abu Ubaidah and other Sahabas that were like generals in some of these armies, they usually were kind of looking at things and commanding. The difference between Khalid, he was in the front, in the thick of everything fighting. And so that used to encourage to make the men want to fight even more. So they had reached the limits, and it said that some even began to wonder if Khalid had met his match. Okay, so a little more signs at the front was starting to shatter, and if it would have been a little bit more, then the Muslims' whole front would have shattered. That's how much pressure was on them. So then what happens? Khalid gives a sign. We don't know what the sign was, but he makes a gesture, and the next moment, over the crest of the ridge and stretched behind the Persian army, because remember, they were sitting there, and then as they got more bold, the army started moving forward, and then they got more bold, and they started moving forward, and they started moving forward. Now that it was this dark lines of mounted warriors came around the left rear, and they said that they heard cries of people yelling Allahu Akbar. And it was the Muslim cavalry that the one guy he didn't see on the battlefield. So now we know where the other 2,000 to 5,000 soldiers went. So they galloped and they trembled, and it said the thundering hooves like of all of their horses was coming down, and the joy of the Persians now turned into terror. And a moment before they had begun shouting and being happy, now the Muslims had placed panic and rammed them from the back. So the main body of the Muslims under Khalid was refreshed when they saw the sight of the Muslims coming from behind and killing all of the enemy from behind. And then they was caught in the trap and nobody could escape. So now the Muslims is but thousands of Muslims is behind them. They got the other Muslims in front of them, and they all squashed now, and they got nowhere that they can run. So the disciplined Persians now started. It was chaos and pandemonium. So when a group of soldiers turned to the rear, and they was pierced by lances, and they fell by the swords. And when they turned to the front, they were struck with swords and daggers, and it just was a bad situation for them. And now the ground of Walaja became a hell thing for them. So the commander himself, he managed to escape, and he went into the direction towards the desert rather than the Euphrates. And so, mashallah, he's running for his life. He ends up going into the desert, and he ends up dying of thirst. So he's running, he's deep into the desert. They don't have to run after him like that, but they end up finding him, and he dies in the thirst dies in the desert of thirst. So after the battle, Khalid got all of the men together who were exhausted, mashallah, and he realized that it put a terrible strain on them. And this was the fiercest of all the Kazima, Qarin, the battle by the river. This by far was the most fierce out of all three of those. And they were exhausted. Okay? And so Khalid, he makes this speech. He praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He sends blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he says to the soldiers, "Do you not see the wealth of this land of the Persians? Do you not remember the poverty of the land of the Arabs? Do you not see how the crops of this land cover the earth? If the holy war were not enjoined by Allah, we should still come and conquer this rich land in exchange for the hunger of our deserts and the abundant eating, which is now ours." So he's like, subhanAllah, look how Allah then blessed us. And subhanAllah, we understand from a hadith that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that this was going to happen. That when he struck the rock in the Battle of Khandaq, it was a big, huge rock that they couldn't crack. So when he struck the rock, he started had a vision of the Muslims conquering Persia, and the hypocrites used to laugh at this. Abdullah ibn Ubay said, "Oh man, they crazy, talking about going against Persia." Beating Persia, the baddest empire in history. These Muslims is delusional. SubhanAllah, look at what's happening. And this is in the course of a short period of time. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has only been deceased probably about a year. It's not real long that this is happening. So He comes and Khalid is looking at where they came from, and look at where we are now. So the day before the Battle of Walaja, so this is what happened. So Khalid has sent for two of his officers. The name is Bushr bin Abi Raham and Sa'id ibn Mara. So he made each one of them a commander of a mobile striking force of about 2,000 cavalry. And he instructed them as follows. He said they would take their horsemen out during the night, move around a wide round the south of the Persian camp. So it might have took them, Allahu Alam, hours for them to go around a particular area and not be seen by anybody. So they left at nighttime. So on the arrival, on the far side of the ridge, which stretched behind the Persian camp, they would conceal their men, but keep them ready to move at a short notice. When the battle was joined in the morning, they would keep their men mounted behind a crest on the ridge. So they're hiding behind. Nobody can see them. It's 2,000 soldiers hiding behind now that the sun is up. And it says that the two striking forces would charge the Persian army and outflank them. And this is when Khalid would give them the sign. Okay? So in the morning, the cavalry comprising the striking forces was nowhere to be seen. And Khalid had his 10,000 men. And subhanAllah, we know where the other men were. So they snuck out at night, and it was a beautiful, Khalid played it beautiful. He got them in because Allahu Alam, if it would have been, he waited until they started drawing into them more, and their back was exposed for them to be attacked from behind. So this was the plan for the Battle of Walaja, and this is fought in Safar. This is the 12th year of Hijri, and it was the frontal holding attack combined with a powerful envelopment, and the operation went down to the smallest detail, and Khalid didn't say anything to anybody. Secrecy was a key point to this, okay? And so he made sure nobody knew except for the people who needed to know, all right? So Al-Qaqa ibn Amr, he makes this statement when they're getting ready to go into this thing called the River of Blood. And says Allah watered the dead with the relentless Euphrates and others in the middle of the areas of Najaf. So he's recounting of what happened in this battle that we're getting ready to talk about. So the third great battle with the Persians have been won, mashallah, the Battle of Walaja. And like I said before, the ultimate objective was to get to Hira. Hira is the crown jewel of where they're trying to be, okay? So in spite of this maneuver, a few thousand of the enemy warriors still was able to escape. And, mashallah, this is something that you can't necessarily control, but they probably were able to stop a lot of it. Maybe a couple thousand, whereas before, if you got 30, 40,000 people, 5,000 might have escaped. So this time, maybe only 1,000 escaped. So, mashallah, they weren't able to get everybody to escape because he knew that they would go ahead and rejoin the other people they were going to end up fighting. So mainly the Christian Arabs from the tribe of Muthanna's tribe, Bani Bakr, they were the ones that was giving the Muslims an issue as far as joining up with the Persian army, because a lot of them lived in Iraq. So they had responded to the call of that particular commander, and they saw what he suffered at Walaja, okay? So a few days, Khalid had he rested, and the troops, they rested because, like I said, they were exhausted. And he was busy with more so dealing with the spoils of war, and he still had to deal with Bahman's army. Remember, he dealt with the one person, and he stopped them from being able to join, but there's another big army that they got to go and fight. So Khalid knew from the agents of the presence and the hostile Arabs at this place called Ulayas. And they were the survivors at Walaja, and they didn't consider or this was a military problem. So in the case, he didn't wish to overstrain his men by rushing to this one particular place because they still having to rest. So when about 10 days later, he was informed of the arrival of more Arab forces. So now they started to become bigger. And it became evident that they was drawing up a whole big new army, that it was going to be an issue for the Muslims. So the hostile concentration was large enough in order to deal with a major battle that was on the rise. And he started to send detachments from the lower Tigris to join him. So Khalid set off from Walid with an army with about 18,000 men. Okay, so there appeared to be an unearthly quality about the army of Islam, and it said of which had emerged out of the desert. And like I said before, we talked about how the Arabs were in the Prophet ﷺ's class. This is revolutionary that they could even do something like this at all. And so this is something that Khalid had pondered before he became Muslim. And his thing was, it has to be something about the religion, because remember, they were fighting each other in terms of Quraysh. Quraysh fighting Quraysh. He knew these people. So it was like every time we fight them, we losing. You know, they're smaller than we are. So it got to be something about Islam as far as them just being good fighters. It's something about Islam. And so the Persians had the same type of outlook when it came to the Muslims now as well. Now they've lost 4 major battles, thousands of their soldiers killed, and with these so-called uncultured Arabs coming out of the desert and really taking it to them. So it was clear that was something about Islam which was able to make them this solid cemented structure to be feared. Okay, so the Persians were a race of conquerors and rulers who had lost battles before, but they had always risen up again. Okay, and we saw this. Anybody who's good at history, like I said, the Persians and the Byzantine Empire fought each other a lot. And even though they had turmoil in their kingdoms, they still had a strong army. And they still had seasoned veterans. They still had, and they said they had good soldiers that knew how to fight. Okay, so meanwhile, messengers from the surviving Christian Arabs from Bani Bakr arrived at Ctesiphon and informed it happened. So they come in and they told them we just got beat really bad, and they had sought help from other fellow Arabs and inhabiting the region between Ulayas and Hira. So a response, thousands of Arabs were even now marching to join Bani Bakr. And, you know, mashallah, a lot of their people got killed. The Muslims killed a lot of their people. So this was more so anger and revenge that they was on. Okay. So the emperor sent orders to Bahman, who was still north of the Euphrates. So Allahu Alam, if he even knows what happened to the other people, because those armies were never able to emerge with each other. So when he heard about Walid, the emperor told him what happened to Walid. He stopped in his tracks and he decided to proceed towards Ulayas, where the Christian Arabs were going. Okay, so under his command, he would assemble all of these different people in order to take on Khalid and stop him from coming into Hira. That's what they want to do. So Bahman himself did not go to Ulayas, but he sent a person by the name of Jaban. And he got instructions from the emperor, and he said, listen, avoid a battle until I get there. Instead, unless you forced to fight, then you got to do what you got to do. But now that they're not underestimating the Muslims now. So Jaban, he moved with his army towards this area where all of these Christian Arabs have formulated. And this is in a region of Hira, and the place is called Amaghashia. And they had realized that Khalid's mission was to take Hira. So now they know where he's going. And they felt that his success would mean more bloodshed and him taking more captives. So now they're doing everything that they can in order to prevent this from happening. And now Jaban assumed command of the entire army, the Christian Arabs, and the Persians as well. So the person who was in charge of the Christian Arabs, his name was Abdul Aswad. And both of his sons had gotten killed in the Battle of Walid, And so he was upset and was seeking revenge in order to try to kill as many Muslims or stop them as much as he possibly could. So the Persian and Arab camp side by side with the Euphrates to their left and a place called Khashif to their right, and the river junction was behind them. So, mashallah, the river once again provided provided protection for them not to get rerouted from behind. Okay, so before the arrival of Jaban, Muthanna, which always had a light cavalry with him, he was always kind of causing them problems on the fringes. So he would fight them, cause them problems. They would take little forts here and there, so on and so forth. And now he appeared at Ulayas and made contact with the Christian Arabs. Okay, so Muthanna then informed Khalid of the enemy position and the strength and the intention for them to fight against the Muslims. So Khalid increased his pace, and he hoped to catch the Christians before they were able to have reinforcements of the Persian forces. Same thing he did with the other person. So he's trying to stop it and go deal with the Christian Arabs before Bahman gets there. Okay, but he decided to kill as many of them as he possibly could, and he also decided to fight on that day. So the longer the battle went, the closer the Persians would be able to get there and to help them out. So you get the idea, if they were getting ready to fight on one particular time, right? They might wait a day. They setting up camp, all the enemy is setting up camp, and then they're going to fight in the morning, whatever they're going to do. Khalid was like, no, forget that. As soon as he got there, his thing was to rush him. And that totally it was going to catch him off guard. So the Muslim advanced the battle, continued for some time before Jaban came to know that he was about to be attacked. So now the Muslims is rushing. They see him, but they're like, they're kind of far, and they're still assuming that the Muslims are going to stop and they're going to set up camp. Okay, so the cooks had appeared, and it was time for them to eat. This is the Persian Empire. And the soldiers of all races and ages, they was like, man, listen, we want to eat first. We shouldn't be fighting anybody on an empty stomach. And so the Arab Christians was ready for battle. Okay, so Jaban looked at his soldiers and was like, he saw the food being brought out. They spread out a big, huge mat, and he's looking in a direction, and the Muslims is approaching rapidly. Once again, he's probably thinking, hey, we see them, they see us, we eating, they're going to stop, they're going to get themselves together, and we probably going to end up fighting later. That did not happen. So they were, he said, so come on, let's eat. So we're getting ready to eat, and we'll fight later. And he said, I fear, this is Jaban telling the soldiers, I fear that the enemy will not let you eat in peace. And they like, no, we need to eat, and we're going to eat now. So they kind of gave him an issue about this. So the food was steaming, they getting ready to do. So now the Muslims then is on them. So now they know that the Muslims is not stopping. So they was only able to eat like a couple mouthfuls of their food, and then they hurried and to try to get into formation. And Abdul Aswad and a person by the name of Abjar, they amassed the troops in the center. Okay, so they didn't do what they did. They was ready to fight. But mashallah, it still was advantage for the Muslims because the other larger group of the army of experience, they sitting there, they eating, and they wasn't ready. Okay, so it was a very hard battle. And the Battle of Walajah had been a fierce battle, and it became that Khalid, it was a battle that he said he would never forget. So Khalid ends up killing Abdul Aswad, the person who was in charge of the Christians. He killed him, and they still was on it. They still was fighting fiercely. So if ever army meant to fight to the last person, it was the army of the army of Ulayas. So the Arab auxiliaries was like on a do or die thing. It was like, this is it. We're going to if we not getting taken captives, we're going to die here. And they fought like they did. Okay. So a couple of hours of them going back and forth, and the fighting was at its heaviest on the bank of the river where a large number of the Persians fell into combat. And so the Muslims was tired and frustrated and angry, and they saw the Persians not weakening. So Khalid raises his hand in dua, and he says, "Oh Allah, if you give us victory, I shall see that no enemy warrior is left alive until their river runs with this blood." So the Muslims renewed their assault, and this time with great fury. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then gave them victory. And in the early afternoon, the army was shattered. The Persian army was shattered, and the soldiers ended up fleeing and fled the battlefield. So thousands of them lay dead. And they were on the bank of the river, and blood, the soil was soaked with blood. But it wasn't in the river. So as the Persian army fled from the battlefield, Khalid launched his cavalry and told them, "Look, chase them." And it says, "Don't kill them. When you catch them and bring them back here." So he brought them back alive, and the bed of the river was soaked with the blood. But like I said, the blood wasn't running. What's the dua that he made? He said he told if Allah gave him victory, that their blood was going to run down this river. So the Muslim cavalry broke into several groups. They galloped out in pursuit of the fugitives, and they crossed this place called Khashif, and they were fleeing in the direction of Hira. And the parties of the desperate Persian and Arabs, they was isolated from one another. They were surrounded. They was overpowered. They disarmed them, and then they drove them back to where Khalid was. So after each group was brought back, they was herded to the river, and every man was beheaded in the riverbed and the bank where his blood ran into the river. And the pursuit of the Muslim cavalry, they captured, and the return of the Persian and the Arab warriors, and their killing in the river went on for the whole day. They was killing them all day. Okay, so every warrior was decapitated. So it's like it's nothing left. So Khalid was like, "I'm keeping my pledge." And it's not until on the third day that everybody was dead that they caught. And so Al-Qaqa, he says, "Listen, if you kill all of the people on the earth, their blood is not going to flow as long as the river." They had the river dammed up. So it wasn't flowing. It was just dead, and it was just sitting there. So then he said, "Look, we need to go ahead and unclog the dam. And then, your pledge would be fulfilled to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." And this is exactly what they did. And blood came rushing down the bed of the river with all of these enemies' blood. So as night fell, after the day that the battle was fought, the Muslim cavalry was out bringing in fugitives. And then Khalid sat down to eat some food of the Persians and laid out upon these meal cloths. And the Arabs, the Muslims, was like marveled at how well that they eat. So obviously, I don't know if the food was still there when they had killed all of them and stuff like that, but they were like in shock because the Arabs, they're coming out of the day rough. They're not used to that type of stuff. You know what I mean? They had this beautiful kind of laid out spread, and Khalid is eating the food like, "Man, this is good," And so they ate the food of the Persians, and this particular battle of Ulayas is over. So an enormous amount of spoils fell into the hand of the Muslims, and according to Tabari, a famous Muslim historian, he says that 70,000 Persians and Christian Arabs were killed by the Muslims, including those who was beheaded at the river. But Jaban, who was one of the commanders, he ended up escaping. Okay, so on the following day, Khalid entered into a pact with the local inhabitants of the district. And of course, the typical terms: listen, you can either become Muslim or you pay the jizya. You can keep your religion. We're not forcing in Islam. There's no compulsion in religion. We don't force people to become Muslim. And he said, but you're paying for the Muslims' protection. Okay. And so therefore, this is exactly what they did. And so this is something which the kuffar has tried to criticize Khalid on, right? This particular battle, it was like he was killing prisoners. These people wasn't prisoners. These people were enemy combatants. So as they were running, they didn't come to the Muslims and say, threw their arms down at that particular time and said, I give up, take me as a captive, I don't want to fight anymore. They didn't do that. So if they were, as they were running, the Muslims would have killed them as they were out in the battlefield running. But Khalid had given them specific instructions to bring them back. So they weren't prisoners of war. Okay, they was enemies. They were enemy combatants. And remember, these are the same types of people that if they had ended up running, they were going to join another military force and they were going to end up fighting the Muslims like they had done all of the other 4 and 5 battles that they end up fighting them with in the first place. So one day after the campaign had been fought, Khalid had sat chatting with some of his friends and he said, at Muta, I broke 9 swords. And he says, I never met an enemy like the Persians. So once again, Khalid is not a person, he's not a hater. So, you know, he gives the enemy their props. You know, he said, man, listen, at Muta, I fought and I broke 9 swords fighting them. But this, the enemy, the Persians, oh, that's a whole nother monster. And so he says, among them, I've never met an enemy like the enemy of Ulayas. So now he's giving credit to the Persians that fought at Ulayas and the Christian Arabs that they were fighting as well. But the Persian court was down, and Ardashir, who is the emperor at the time, he's dying. And so now they was like this, and he was the great-great-grandson of this person. His name was Anushirwan the Just. So Anushirwan was a person that brought the Persian Empire great success and prestige. And this was the last living descendant of this particular person. And so he died. Nobody, he didn't get, sound like he died. He died of, you know, maybe he was sick of natural causes or something like that. But now the empire is like at a loss. Now they really don't know what to do. Allah knows best as to who's going to be the ruler, so on and so forth. And, you know, so that's where we are with that. So I'm trying to debate here if I want to go to this one, or should I leave y'all again on the cliffhanger? MashaAllah. Well, we got about 9 minutes left. Isha's about to be in soon. So I think, inshallah, I think I'll stop there and we'll open up the floor for any comments or questions, inshallah. Bismillah. Stop.
One of the brothers here said, so he did not kill them. This is something that I did not know.
He didn't kill who?
Those men that ran away from the field.
Yeah, no, they got killed. No, they got killed. They ran when they were Khalid. Remember, Khalid, he made a oath to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he made dua, he said that the blood of these people was going to run down the river. So his thing was like, listen, the ones that they ran from the battlefield, the people, the enemy. So let me make sure. I hope the brother didn't think that I meant Muslims doing that. The enemy that ran from the battlefield, they were not prisoners of war. They didn't throw their arms down and say, I surrender and I don't want to fight anymore. They didn't do that. They ran for their life, and more than likely what they've been doing is they run from this battle, and then when another army formulate, they end up joining forces with that one. And so if Khalid didn't tell his soldiers not to bring them back, they would have killed them out in the battlefield anyway. You know what I mean? So he just did that. He brought them back and had them executed because he had made a pledge. And it goes to show you how serious Muslims take pledges to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he made that pledge, even though he had defeated the enemy, but he made sure that he completed what he had promised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he would do if he was granted victory.
Okay, here's another question from one of the sisters. She says, subhanAllah, this is so good, so good. It's like watching a television show. She said, I have a question though. I know that the women were taken as right-hand possessions so they could care for them and their kids. But what did they do with the men? Did they kill all the men, or wherever any of the men that were taken, were they given a made slaves or something?
Yeah, more than likely they was given, they were captives, they were made slaves, you know what I mean, and that kind of thing. And mashallah, I think that's a whole nother class. Is what does slavery in Islam look like? It's not like slavery in America. It wasn't color based. It wasn't a situation where you was a slave for the rest of your life. It wasn't a situation where you got put up on a tree and the daylights beat out of you for no reason. It wasn't like that at all. You know what I'm saying? Even subhanallah, a slave in Islam, that if a slave does commits like say fornication, they get half the punishment. So for fornication, it's 100 lashes if you get caught doing that. A slave only got 50. You understand what I'm saying? So there are Islamic so-called slavery is different than what we would look at. And that word slavery, that's a sensitive word and topic with African Americans. But that inshallah, maybe we can have a class on that alone, so we can understand what that looked like.
Okay, another question is, did a lot of the people end up converting to Islam that were taken? Allahu A'lam, you kind of assume that because the region is all Muslim now, for the most part. I mean, they have some remnants, I think, in some of them areas where their Christians kind of still were there, but the vast majority of the areas is Muslim. So they might have ended up becoming, Muslim. And subhanAllah, we had talked about last week when Khalid had invaded one of those areas, and it was a Christian area. It was kids that was like kind of studying. I don't know if they were in a church, but these kids were taken and they were treated well. And actually they converted to Islam. And one of the descendants of one of these people that was taken by Khalid is Tariq ibn Ziyad, who ends up going and conquering Spain. So a lot of them did end up becoming Muslim and that kind of thing. But you don't get the idea that they held on. Some of them definitely, they held on to whatever religion and they paid the jizya. But if they was captives, some of them did end up becoming Muslim, and they got freed a lot of times because of that. And but as far as every situation, I don't really know. Another just a comment here. The brother here says they were so strong in their faith, and you compare how Muslims were then as to how they are today. It's just really sad.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, those are all the comments here on YouTube and Facebook. You guys got anything in the Zoom room?
I just had this one thing to say. You went to talking about Khalid and that big old man, and he was sitting on his stomach for a chair when he killed him. It reminded me of, remember the giant and the boy?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It reminded me of that when you told that part of the story.
Yeah. I said, oh man, Khalid is, when I read that, I said, oh, Khalid is cold. I mean, you're talking about some psychological warfare and making people angry. Especially this guy was all big and stuff, and he made him a chair and ate and took his time and ate lunch. Lunch is such a leisure meal of the day. You know what I mean? So it served, multiple purposes on the mind frame of the enemy, by him doing that. Any other questions? Okay, alhamdulillah. So inshallah, we'll be together with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's permission next week. And if any good came from this, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And any mistakes that was made is from me. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me for them. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.